Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Executive Director of the Sandy Spring Museum, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us on this special occasion. I did want to start by asking our elected officials, those of you who are here, if you could stand and introduce yourselves, because we're so grateful that you arrived today. Go ahead. Thank you. You. I know that a number of our board members are also here today. If you could all just stand and wave to the audience, that we're very appreciative of your support of the museum and our programs. Thank you. Great. As you know, we're all here today to honor and celebrate Mary Bentley Thomas and Carolyn Hallowell Miller. But on occasions like this, I'm also reminded that we need to continue to work together to ensure greater rights for everybody. Sandy Springs stands firmly with those fighting against racism, structural disadvantage, and systemic injustice that have oppressed people of color in the United States for hundreds of years. Sandy Springs stands on land that was once the home of Native Americans who were forcibly removed from the land, and the land upon which we're standing today was also a plantation where Black people were enslaved. We recognize that the museum is the beneficiary of a historically unjust system, and we're committed towards working towards dismantling systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination in order to build a just, equitable society. Today's keynote address will give us food for thought as we challenge the dominant narrative. Being honored as the location to permanently display this historic marker is the result of work by many individuals and organizations. A deep and heartfelt thank you to the Maryland Heritage Women's Center, hooray, the National Votes for Women's Trail, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, and the Montgomery County Commission for Women. I know you're here too. Thank you. You'll be hearing from several of these groups today, as well as some other special guests. But I wanted to personally thank Dr. Pamela Young for being the lead researcher on the history of Mary Bentley Thomas and Carolyn Hallowell Miller. There you are. I learned so much from working with Pam. Thank you. So my first guest is Maria John Darby, the president of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, who will provide opening remarks.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am so proud to be the president of the board of Maryland Women's Heritage Center. I could not think of a more perfect day than in this beautiful sunny day in Sandy Spring to be talking about women and their contributions to society. I want to take a moment, though, to share a few quick things about the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. The center was created to preserve the past, understand the present, and shape the future by giving voice to Maryland women, making sure that our stories and unique contributions are known, heard, shared, and valued. In our mission, in short, our mission is to add her story to his story to make our story. The Maryland Women's Heritage Center wholeheartedly believes in partnerships, and we are honored to partner with so many incredible organizations and volunteers to bring this day to fruition. Diana Bailey is our executive director, whose tireless energy and commitment to telling women's stories is inspiring. Thank you, Diana. Where is she? Where is she? There you go, Diana. Thank you. I'd like to also offer special appreciation to Dr. Pam Young, our Maryland Women's Heritage Center volunteer who did the significant research on the Montgomery County suffragists and who found this wonderful site for the marker, as well as Allison Weiss, the executive director of the museum, for hosting the unveiling today and who worked with us last summer to produce the podcast for the Ballots and Beyond project with Preservation Maryland. Thank you, Allison. Maryland will have a total of 10 suffrage markers approved by the Pomeroy Foundation. We hope you will join us at our new home for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center in the historic Women's Industrial Exchange Building in Baltimore City for the next marker unveiling on October 16th. Very exciting. We're very, very excited about that. Both the marker unveiling and our new home, which was a long, long haul for us. Then we're off to Howard County, where we will be working with the Howard County Historical Society to unveil their marker honoring Howard County suffragists on November the 13th. Future marker unveilings will take place in Talbot, Garrett, Frederick, and Carroll counties, so check our website for more information as it unfolds. Before I introduce the Pomeroy Foundation, I want to make sure to recognize Jean Thompson, a truly dedicated Maryland Women's Heritage Center volunteer who is serving as the keynote speaker today. Thank you, Jean, for all the good work you do. I'm now pleased to introduce Steve Bodner from the Pomeroy Foundation. Based on our partnership with the National Collaborative of Women's History Sites and the Votes for Women Trail, the Pomeroy Foundation has made the National Marker Program possible. Maryland is very proud to have been approved for the 10 markers based on historical significance and detailed documentation. We are honored to have Steve here with us today. Steve? Glasses. Hi.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here this afternoon. I'm a representative of the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, and I am going to be reading a letter of commendation from Ms. Darren Pomeroy. She's one of our trustees, the Director of Strategic Initiatives, and Bill Pomeroy's daughter. So, Darren writes, "Congratulations on your National Votes for Women Trail Marker Dedication Ceremony. On behalf of the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, we send you our best wishes from Syracuse, New York, as you commemorate Maryland women suffrage leaders Carolyn Hallowell Miller and Mary Bentley Thomas. At the Pomeroy Foundation, one of our main initiatives is to help people celebrate their community's history. Since 2006, when my father, Bill Pomeroy, established the Foundation's first marker program, we have awarded more than 1,500 grants for roadside markers and plaques nationwide. Markers help educate the public, encourage pride of place, and promote historic tourism. Today, you commemorate Miller and Thomas for their significant contributions to the women's suffrage movement with this National Votes for Women Trail marker. Now, Sandy Spring joins a select group from across the United States with Pomeroy-funded markers. These markers are well-researched with primary sources reviewed by professional historians, and that's what sets your marker apart. It's a gold standard of historic markers. The Pomeroy Foundation is proud to do our part in commemorating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment by funding these National Votes for Women Trail markers all across the country. You can learn more at wgpfoundation.org. We commend your efforts to celebrate women's suffrage history and send our appreciation to the Sandy Spring Museum, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, representatives from the county and state who are with us today, and our National Votes for Women Trail partner, which is the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, and all those who were involved with bringing this marker to reality. The Pomeroy Foundation is proud to help you preserve the legacy of women's suffrage in Maryland, and we know this marker will ensure the contributions of Miller and Thomas will be celebrated for generations to come. From all our dedicated staff and trustees at the Pomeroy Foundation, congratulations. Warm regards, Darren Pomeroy, trustee, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so nice. So I think this is wonderful timing. I have the pleasure of introducing the County Executive, Mark Elrich, now.
So this is my third event with human beings today. I'm sure normally you'd say you have no idea how good this is. I think you guys know how good this is. It is really nice to be able to be out and see people and talk to people. I'm very excited about it, and it's really good to see everybody here today. This is a great reason to celebrate, and just want to thank the Pomeroy Foundation for the work on this. You know, I keep thinking about Texas, which makes all this all the more relevant. Obviously, the right to vote's not enough. It cannot become women's issues and men's issues. Your issue belong to be men's issues. They are everybody's issues. And this is a struggle that we're going to have to continue to engage in. Obviously, the right to vote didn't get us an equal rights amendment. And we've got to make sure we get the equal rights amendment. It is long past due that women are guaranteed the same constitutional rights that everybody else is guaranteed. And yet none of these things get there unless you take the steps that are in between. And suffrage was a critical change in American history from a society that, people forget, wasn't just white men. It was white men with property, with conditions on voting based on property and conditions on holding office based on even more property. So we come from that, and we have arrived where we are because of the work of the suffragettes in large part. It certainly brought a different voice into American politics. I want to thank, I've already thanked the Pomeroy Foundation, the National Votes for Women Trail, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, the Sandy Spring Museum, and of course, the Montgomery County Commission for Women. All of you have played a critical role in putting this together today. And I'm proud that two people are actually, that you honor, are Montgomery County, part of Montgomery County history. Mary Bentley Thomas and Caroline Hallowell Miller, both Sandy Spring residents, were part of Maryland's women's suffrage movement. And, in my administration, we've made an effort to deal with inequities. Just in general, we think of it as racial inequity, but it's not strictly racial inequity. It's having an equity focus on our policies to make sure that no one gets left behind, that when we think about doing something, we're conscious of the effects on everybody, and that we try to weave that consciousness into the policy making that we do. So I'm happy that we've been able to do this. I was happy that the council supported those efforts when I first got elected. This had been proposed when I was on the county council. It got passed, and it was up to us to implement it. We've been able to implement it. So we want to be assured that women are part of all our considerations and the policies that we make. I'm proud of working with NARAL and the other groups around the state, and when they lobby and work in Congress, it's important for us to be active participants in all this. So again, I just wanted to thank you. This marker, it's going to be a constant reminder of the work that was accomplished here in Maryland, here in Montgomery County, and it's also a symbol of the work that's left to do. And I know that we're all up for that struggle. No one ever rested and said, we're done. We're not done till we're done. And we will get there. And I'm reminded of the Buddhist concept that, our job is, they talked about the wheel of truth, the wheel of Dharma, and they talked about spinning the wheel of Dharma. Any Jack Kerouac fans out there? And this notion of that's the wheel of the truth, and that your job in life is to move that wheel. None of us can be so sure of our importance to know that we're going to arrive at the end destination, and that doesn't matter. What matters is that we do our job to move that wheel forward. And if that wheel arrives there in our time, that's great. And if that wheel simply moves things closer so the next generation can pick up and keep moving that wheel where it has to go, then that's great too. So just keep moving the wheel and keep struggling. We're going to struggle with you, and we will make this a better and stronger place. Now, I'm told I have a proclamation. So I will read the proclamation. Jody said it was long, but I've had longer. So it says, Proclamation, Montgomery County, Maryland. Whereas 2020 marked the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution on August 18th, 1920, the amendment was adopted to provide a constitutional guarantee of women's rights to vote. And whereas we solemnly recognize that women's suffrage was an incomplete victory since Black women, Native American women, and Asian women were not yet extended the right to vote in 1920. And whereas Maryland did not ratify the 19th Amendment until March 29, 1941. Amazing. Nearly 21 years after national ratification. This was only a step for suffrage. Women continue to struggle to secure voting rights for all by fighting against voter suppression in the form of discriminatory poll taxes, literacy tests, and voter roll purges. That sound familiar? And whereas women in Montgomery County played critical roles in advancing equal voting rights, which is why today's marker unveiling is significant. The marker has been rewarded to Sandy Spring Museum through the William G. Pomeroy Foundation through the National Women's Suffrage Marker Grant Program. These markers recognize historically significant people, places, or things across the United States instrumental to women gaining the right to vote. Sandy Spring residents Mary Bentley Thomas and Caroline Hallowell Miller were identified by the Maryland Women's Heritage Center as having made contributions of local and national significance to the women's suffrage movement. Now therefore it be resolved, Mark Elrich is County Executive in commemoration of the contribution of Montgomery County women played in the women's suffrage, hereby proclaims September 12, 2021, Women's Suffrage Marker Day in Montgomery County, and in conjunction with Montgomery County Commission for Women, the Sandy Spring Museum, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, the National Collaborative for Women's History Sites, and the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. I recommend that residents and civic institutions ensure all students and adults have the opportunity to learn about and commemorate the suffrage movement and the vital role women hold in our democracy. Signed this day, 12th of September, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much, County Executive. That was wonderful and inspiring. Next, I would like to ask Delegate Pam Queen to come up and speak with us.
So hello again and welcome to District 14. On behalf of the Legislative District 14 team, 3 of whom are educators and 1 a prior history teacher, we, Senator Craig Zucker, Delegate Ann Kaiser, Delegate Eric Lukey, and me, Delegate Pam Queen, are excited about this important historical marker being placed here at the Sandy Spring Museum. Yay! As a jewel of District 14, Sandy Spring Museum holds its own historical importance as it sits on land of enslaved Black people, and this area was the route of the Underground Railroad. We applaud Sandy Spring Museum for its community-focused, rich cultural programming, and broad range of artistic expression that educates our community. This marker honors Mary Bentley Thomas and Caroline Hallowell Miller, women with well-known community families who were outstanding leaders in the Maryland's women's suffrage movement. Mary Thomas served as president of the Maryland Women's Suffrage Association from 1894 to 1904, and she spoke at many conferences and even before Congress to advocate for women's right to vote. Caroline Miller was a founder of the Maryland Suffrage Association, recruiting women here from Sandy Spring. And unfortunately, she died 15 years before the ratification of the 19th Amendment. For me, growing up in D.C., I know firsthand the detriment to people who don't have the right to vote. As the Home Rule Act was not enacted until 1973, when residents of D.C. had the right to vote for their local elected officials. The first elected mayor of D.C., Walter Washington, was a member of my church, and it was from my church I learned the importance of community activism and community outreach to get things done. I look forward to hearing from Jean Thomas about the advocacy of women of color in the suffrage movement, some of whom have connections to D.C. and Maryland. I join others in sincere thanks to the organizations and groups that made this wonderful commemoration possible. So I thank you, the National Votes for Women's Trail, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, the National Collaborative for Women History Sites, the Montgomery County Commission for Women, and of course, Sandy Spring Museum for all the support that you do. And let's continue the fight because we still don't have all the equal rights that we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate Queen. We have another member of our elected officials that I'd like to introduce. Ms. Sales, would you like to introduce yourself? Yay. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming. Now I would like to introduce a walkthrough time with Mimi Walker.
Can you close your eyes for just a minute and go back in time to 1921? Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Join with me in this chant, please. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Okay, one more time. I know this is siesta time in some cultures, but we are here today to celebrate. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Fantastic. Give yourselves a round of applause. You are all amazing suffragists. And I see some of you have on some of the suffragist colors today. A few of you have on purple and gold and white. And I will tell you a little bit about my attire here in just a minute. Amelia Himes Walker was originally from Pennsylvania, and I went to Swarthmore. So I was raised a Quaker, and my Quaker father taught us 6 children that when you raise a woman and educate her, you also end up educating a family. So my father talked boldly about that. He also taught us that all it takes for evil to take over the world is for a few good people to do nothing. So we were taught to take advantage of every opportunity to participate in social justice and participate in whatever we could to make this a land equal and fair for all. Well, I married right after I graduated from Swarthmore a lovely man whose name is Robert Walker. And Robert Walker hailed from Baltimore. So I landed in Baltimore and became president of the National Women's Party there. Along the journey, I had reacquainted myself with Alice Paul, who then was working with Lucy Burns, and she was delighted to have me on board and to try to make a difference. So of the many things we did up front, one of the events we participated in was a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue on the 3rd of March in 1913, the day before President Wilson was to arrive in Washington, D.C. And this was significant because all of us suffragists, and by the way, we are suffragists. The British ladies are suffragettes. Alice and Lucy thought the suffragists was a little bit more of a ladylike term because we did not participate in vandalism and destruction. But the suffragists decided to plan a march, and it was a very large march on that day before Wilson was to be inaugurated. And we had asked originally if we could march at the back of the inaugural parade. Well, the men putting the parade together said, no, we could not because we were women. So we had our own parade. Down Pennsylvania Avenue, over 8,000 of us, with over 100,000 people looking at our wonderful good work and statement about equality for women and needing the 19th Amendment so we could have the right to vote. While Wilson came into Union Station and found virtually no one there. It was kind of done on purpose. Anyway, Alice and Lucy put together all kinds of wonderful events. Time went on. This was 1913. Wilson promised a look at the 19th Amendment. He did not act on that promise. Parades happened. The wonderful Inez Mulholland was at the head of many of our parades around Washington, D.C. She also lectured for the rights of women around this country. Well, one of the things you may also know or not know about the suffragists was in 1917, we picketed in front of the White House to make a statement to President Wilson. We were a little fed up by that time for having not gotten the right to vote, and his promised support thereof just never seemed to happen. So I, as Amelia Himes, Mimi Walker, picketed in front of the White House on the 14th of July, 1917, and I was arrested. I was taken to the Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia. And when all 16 of my suffragist sisters and I got there, our clothes were taken from us, our glasses, our jewelry, our shoes. We were given basic prison garb, blankets, which smelled like vomit and urine, and put in cots that looked like they were moldy, but instead covered with bed bugs. That was the beginning of an atrocious window of time in which we had to serve for having picketed in front of the White House our infraction was obstructing traffic, which is pretty hard to do on a sidewalk. We had a choice between paying a fine of $25 or 60 days in jail. And you know darn well what us suffragists did. We went to jail. Our food was equally as miserable as the way we were treated. The water was muddy. The soup was filled with worms. And at one point in time, one of my suffragist sisters said, "This is enough. We will go on hunger strikes." It was not too long before Wilson heard about this, wanted no suffragist markers on his watch. So began force feedings. Tubes were put down our throats that contained raw egg yolk and flour to make sure we did not despair and pass on, thereby becoming martyrs. That was one of many things that happened. And another sad story, and this is one of my epiphany stories. When I was there, the administration asked the Negro girls to beat up on us. And so I had already made contact with a lovely young woman in the cafeteria whose name was Sally. We had no choice but to endure this. And one day Sally cornered me, as she was told to do, punched me in the face, gave me a black eye, and as our eyes met, we both made a commitment that we should never have to live like this again. We were not animals, we were humans. Within a day or two, another Negro girl had a baby boy. And when that baby boy was born, we decided for sure when we left this place, if we had to go pick it again, we'd come back, because this young man should not have to live in a world of that kind of inequality. Time went on, and by the time 1919 rolled around, Wilson still had not done a terribly favorable job of supporting us. The decision was put on to the states, and with the requirement of 36 states ratifying the 19th Amendment, we would be able to get the right to vote. One of the last states to vote was Tennessee. Well, during this whole voting time, we presented different legislators across the country with a red rose if they voted against the 19th Amendment. They were given a yellow rose if they voted for it. I have told my Robert, don't ever bring home any red roses for me. Anyway, so Harry Byrne in Tennessee, a brand new congressman. Everyone thought for sure he would vote against the 19th Amendment, but the night before, his mother had sent him a letter. She said, "Now, Harry, you do the right thing. You make sure you take care of women." He listened to his mama. He voted for the 19th Amendment, and with that, the 36 star was sewn on a wonderful banner down in Washington, D.C. by Alice Paul, which indicated the ratification of the 19th Amendment. It was quite a fight. It was quite a struggle. And my sadness is that there is still so much work to do. Still so very, very much work to do. But the message I want to leave you all with today is this. I hope and I pray from deep in my Quaker heart that never again will our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers ever have to stand in front of the White House again with banners and chanting, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such a wonderful story. Now I would like to ask two things. One, show of hands of anybody here who is a relative of either the Bentley Thomas or the Hallowell Miller family. Quite a few, wonderful. And I would also like to, yes, thank you for coming. I'd like to specifically invite up to help me unveil the marker the great-granddaughter, Rusty Sutter, Gail DeRose, the great-great-granddaughter, and Alex Fennington, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Mary Bentley Thomas.
Votes for Women. In 1889, Carolyn Hallowell Miller began a suffrage club here. In 1894, Mary Bentley Thomas led State Suffrage Association and testified at U.S. Congress.
Thank you. How exciting for us to be able to invite Mary Bentley's all her wonderful granddaughters. She must be smiling down right now. Lastly, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Jean Thompson, to address the audience, please. Everything's blowing away right now.
Good catch. Thank you so much, Allison, and for everyone here at the Sandy Spring Museum on this beautiful day, our legislators, our board members, the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, and family members, thank you. To welcome you on this glorious occasion, I also need to extend heartfelt thanks to my colleague Pamela Young. Pam and I have shared some wonderful adventures in volunteer research for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center as we commemorated the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And beyond, we're building a database of Maryland women who participated in suffrage activity. And many of the stories that we've begun to tell are brand new, stories that are not in any textbook, that have never been written before. We're very excited to share some of those with you today. Today, we remember and celebrate the commitment of women who paved the way so that we would have the right to vote. Our forward-thinking ancestors understood that the fruits of freedom in a democratic society are represented by and protected at the ballot box. In recent decades, historians have acknowledged the complexities of the American suffrage movement. While we recognize champions of suffrage, we also acknowledge that there is hard history. Today, I have been asked to share stories about some of the hidden figures of the suffrage movement, Black women whose contributions and participation have largely been overlooked, forgotten, or erased. By recovering and bringing to light their stories, we are able to tell a more complete history and her story. Today, I'll share stories from my research into Black women's important roles in two milestones of Maryland suffrage history. Let's begin at the beginning, in the year 1870. In 1870, a group of 150 Maryland women and men petitioned the Maryland General Assembly, asking the state of Maryland to give women the right to vote. 1870. Let me provide some context. More than 200 years had passed since 1648, when Margaret Brent asked the Colonial Assembly for a voice and a vote in St. Mary's. On November the 1st, 1864, Maryland abolished slavery as it adopted a new state constitution. And we know, of course, that many enslaved people had been freed by their masters before that date, and that free Black citizens congregated in the Baltimore area. The Civil War ended in 1865. With this petition for women's suffrage in 1870 and other early political action, we are seeing beginnings the emergence of sophisticated organizing in our state to pursue the right to vote for women. Now, I have been very curious about the petitioners of 1870, especially the women. So one by one, I've been submitting their names to genealogical research tools to find out who they were. Recently, I found many of the women listed in Baltimore city directories from 1870 and 1871 in the pages labeled as the section for colored citizens. Charlotte Brooks, a cook. Comfort Williams, laundress. Nancy Jolly, widow of a soldier in the U.S. colored troops. Elizabeth Shepard, laundress, and more, many more. Recall now that in 1870, the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution granted black men in America access to the ballot. Women who had hoped to be included under that law were not, and many protested. Some went as far as to disparage black men and women for seeking progress. We know that many black women supported the legislation that would enable their fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons to vote, because it was in the interest of their families and communities, which were so often denied schooling, denied opportunities for economic advancement, denied protection from lynching. Now we see where the black woman also took the next step. They pressed on with the fight for the vote, for all women, not just for themselves. The black women who signed the petition may have been members of Maryland's earliest known women's suffrage club. The Maryland Equal Rights Society was founded around 1865. It began as a universal suffrage club seeking the vote for women and for black men. Later, it became a women's suffrage club led by a white peace activist, Lavinia Dundor, who was a suffragist and a legal clerk. We know that this club's original charter was signed by founding members who were black and white. It began as an integrated club. We are told that its office was in the Douglas Institute, a Baltimore center of black political activism and education that was named for Frederick Douglass, another Marylander. In Susan B. Anthony's History of Women's Suffrage, she tells us that this club was not welcomed elsewhere in Baltimore when it tried to find a place for its headquarters. We also know that during this time, laws in Maryland restricted the right of assembly of free black people. They could gather, but only if white persons were present. They could buy the Douglas Institute building if white persons controlled the deed. Freedom was not free. Emancipation was not equality. In Annapolis, when the petition was filed in 1870, legislators and the press mocked the women. But looking back now, we can say that this was a milestone moment in what would become a decades-long fight with the Maryland General Assembly to recognize women as full citizens in Maryland. This is just the first known of a long series of proposals for women's suffrage legislation, all rejected. To me, the petition in 1870 was as audacious as Margaret Brent's demand in 1648. And though the chroniclers of history have mostly given them short shrift, I see this petition's evidence that black women were clearly involved in women's suffrage in Maryland from the earliest recorded days of the fight. Now, this activism did not occur in isolation. Baltimore and Annapolis had black newspapers that wrote about politics and civil rights issues, and the women read them. They also subscribed to them. Also, one of the leading black voices for women's suffrage during the late 1800s was that of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a writer, orator, and suffragist from Baltimore. She attended national suffrage events alongside the biggest names in women's suffrage. She was a founding member of the American Women's Suffrage Association. In 1866, she exposed racial inequities during a speech at a national suffrage convention, when she said, "You white women speak of rights. I speak of wrongs." She called on the suffragists to stand with black women who stood with them. Black women needed the vote because they endured segregation, threats of violence, inequities in education and economic opportunity. Unfortunately, at that time, there were many white suffragists and Southern politicians who did not want black women to vote or to experience equality. They did not want the black population that was free to increase in power. So let's fast forward now. By the turn of the century, the club women's movement emerges, and black women in Maryland and across the country are using collective power to advance causes, not just for themselves, but for their churches, their families, their communities. Black women's groups are forming, and one of the earliest appears in 1906 as the Women's Auxiliary of a civil rights organization. The Du Bois Circle was named for W.E.B. Du Bois, and it begins as a support group of a movement called the Niagara Movement, precursor to the NAACP. It still exists today and still meets. Prominent black women participated in its activities and lent support to each other's civic causes. Some were also members of a suffrage club that formed to help defend the voting rights of black men. It is necessary for this because many Maryland petitions would try to take away the voting rights that black men had won with the 15th Amendment. Some succeeded. Another of the Du Bois Circle's causes was women's suffrage. In 1915, a group of Du Bois Circle members formed a separate club devoted solely to women's suffrage. And they call it the Progressive Women's Suffrage Club. It is founded in West Baltimore, which was where segregated black families lived. The major suffrage clubs in Maryland, run by prominent white women, did not welcome most of the black members, so they formed their own. Also during this time, Baltimore enacted a law, a segregation law, to try to prevent black families and white families from living near each other. The law was quite specific. If your block was predominantly white, no one black could buy a house on that block. If your block was predominantly black, no one white could buy a house on that block. There were also attacks on black homes when black families tried to buy houses near the white blocks. The Progressive Women's Suffrage Club president and frequent spokeswoman was Estelle Hall Young. Estelle was married to a Baltimore pharmacist, Dr. Howard E. Young, and we see an important connection through him with Montgomery County. Her father-in-law, the Reverend Alfred Young, was pastor of Sharp Street Methodist Church in Baltimore. We believe they had connections with Sharp Street Methodist Church right here in Sandy Spring. Estelle's suffrage activism may have stretched from Baltimore to Montgomery County. Former Maryland Historical Trust researcher Casey Rohn, a colleague of ours at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, documented the West Baltimore Black Suffrage Club. Two of its leaders, Augusta Chiselle and Margaret Gregory Hawkins, were next-door neighbors on Druid Hill Avenue, just a few blocks from Dr. Young's pharmacy. The women held club meetings in their parlors, and when their activities outgrew their homes, they met at the Black community's YWCA and in Black churches. Estelle was an active public speaker, and the women helped her gain opportunities to talk before many clubs. One of the most important contributions made by this Black suffrage club was voter education. When the 19th Amendment became the law of the land in 1920, America was at the eve of a presidential election. In Maryland, more than 63,000 Black women statewide were immediately eligible to register to vote. The question on everyone's mind was, would they? 7 days of voter registration were scheduled, and on the first day, the Baltimore Sun newspaper reported that women were out in droves. All women. The Afro newspaper reported on September 21, 1920, Women's Spring, a big surprise. By unofficial count, on the first day of voter registration, more than 2,300 Black women in the city fulfilled their civic duty. On that first of 7 days of walk-up registration on Druid Hill and on Pennsylvania Avenue, the predominantly Black 14th and 17th political wards of Baltimore, quote, women were out in force to register and stayed in long lines stretching out on the sidewalk until their turn came. This vanguard of ready-to-vote Black women in West Baltimore, quote, went through the process of registering as though they had studied nothing else for weeks. Well, the reporter's editorial musing was not far from the truth, because the Progressive Women's Suffrage Club set up a suffrage school in the YWCA. Every Thursday, anyone who wanted could go down and learn, what is a ballot? What does it look like? What are the issues on the ballot this year? How do I vote? How do I register? They were prepared, because they understood that the victory was not only in gaining the vote, but in using it. Every Thursday night, more came. The Afro-American newspaper ran a large ad for a rally inviting the city's women to come. And speakers who had issues on the ballot came to educate them. In addition, Augusta Chiselle started a column in the Afro-American newspaper called A Primer for Women Voters. Women wrote in and asked questions about the issues on the ballot: how to vote, why to vote. Here's one of the questions: what good will it do for women to vote? And Chiselle replied, it will give women power to protect themselves in their persons, property, children, occupations, opportunities, and social relations. It will enable them to get done what ought to get done. Today, while we celebrate the work that led to the passage of the 19th Amendment, we must also remember that for many Black women living below the Mason-Dixon line, the work did not end in 1920. Many were discouraged by threats of violence or loss of their jobs if they attempted to vote. Some were forced from their communities. Some were denied at the ballot box. For several more decades, Black women would continue to organize, lobby, and mobilize support across Black communities and sympathetic white communities to demand the full fruits of freedom. Many did not receive the opportunity to vote until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Unfortunately, we are still fighting to protect those rights today. When I was a kid, everybody knew Susan B. Anthony's name. Back then, I could not have named a single Black suffragist. They just were not in the textbooks. In fact, are not now, many of them. Today, thanks to the work of the Maryland Women's Heritage Center and groups like it, and many women historians, we can ensure that every girl and every boy growing up in Maryland will know that there were women of color who wanted to vote, who organized, petitioned, and lobbied for the vote, who endured discrimination and risked persecution to vote, and who persevered valiantly to win access to the ballot box. They persisted so that you and I and our granddaughters and future generations may enjoy the fruits of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Story to share with us. Thank you. That concludes the outdoor portion of our program. You're all invited indoors for light refreshments and to view items from the archives that pertain to women's suffrage. So I really encourage you to go inside and take a look. Dr. Young actually used the museum's archive to conduct her research on our local heroines. And the archives are being digitized so you can conduct research from the comfort of your own home and computer. So, but today is a really special opportunity to see the collection in person up close. So we just ask that you wear your masks as you go indoor, maintain social distancing, but please enjoy yourselves. And thank you so much for joining us today.